Hi everyone, now we're going to look at the role of the human resource manager under a decentralised approach. Now the reason we look at it under a decentralised approach is because that's what Australia is in right now. But the role of the human resource manager is very different because under a centralised approach, remember, there was no individual workplace agreements. It was all across an entire industry. So all the sort of negotiation and dispute resolution, there's not much the employer could do about it because it was taken away from them and given to the government essentially to make a decision on what the wages and working conditions were. But under a decentralised approach, it's based on enterprise bargaining, where individual workplaces actually resolve disputes, they negotiate their wages and working conditions, so they need someone to take control of that. And then the human resource manager plays a pivotal role when it comes to employee relations under a decentralised approach because of that. So, three main roles that they have, and that is negotiating employment agreements, and then once they've come to an agreement, they need to implement that agreement, and then along the way, whether that be during negotiation period or once the agreement's been implemented, then they need to resolve disputes and deal with any conflict that arises. So let's go through each one of those, and first of all, negotiating the agreements. The human resource manager are involved in the negotiation process of the agreements. They represent the employer in most cases. So, they understand where the organisation sits, what they want in terms of whether they want to improve their productivity, whatever their strategy that they're trying to achieve out of their employee relations. They know the financial positioning of the organisation. So that's important that they know that information so that when they negotiate, they're not putting the organisation at risk and offering things that they can't afford. So they could involve long negotiations with unions. As I said, need to take into account the needs of the employees. That's important, but also the financial position and the needs of the organisation. If we go back to our roles, key management roles, probably the role of planning and leading are really important in this part of the human resource manager's role. Next, implementing the agreement. So let's assume that the agreement has been approved and Fair Work Australia has approved it. Now it's their job to implement it, and it needs to be implemented on time. So your roles of planning and organising are really important, as well as probably controlling in terms of monitoring how this agreement goes. I mean, there's not much you can do about it during the agreement, but then you might look at it for the next agreement in terms of you want some productivity gains, etc. But yeah, essentially in implementing, planning and organising is really important. Any changes need to be implemented in a timely manner, because if there's a pay rise or some kind of entitlement, the employees need to receive that on the correct date. Otherwise, you're just opening yourself up for a dispute, and that's not good for anyone. So it's important that those entitlements are there on the correct dates. Managers and supervisors also need to be notified, because there could be changes in processes, changes in procedures, anything like that, because part of the negotiation could have been that some kind of productivity gain for an organisation. So those things need to be implemented, and as a result, there may need to be some training that happens for managers and supervisors so that they know what's going on. So that is implementing the agreements. Next, dispute resolution. Hopefully it never gets to this, but quite often it does. So if negotiations have failed, then the employees or the employer can take industrial action. So industrial action are things like strikes, go-slows, etc. We'll get into those a bit more in depth later on. But when that happens, the human resource manager needs to be active in resolving the dispute so that negotiations can continue and they can get back to work, because essentially if they're taking time off work, now if people strike, they don't have to pay them for the day they take off, but it's still, there's loss of productivity in the workplace, so they may not be able to meet orders or meet their obligations to their suppliers, etc., to the people they're supplying. So there could be a lot of paperwork, may have to liaise with Fair Work Australia, and you might have to get Fair Work Australia involved to try and stop the dispute, whatever it may be. But essentially you're trying to get resolve the dispute so that then negotiations can happen and you can actually come to an agreement that's win-win for both parties, and then implement it so that the employees are really happy, but the organisation is also really happy. That's important, and that's a happy workplace. So just to recap, the role of the human resource manager in a decentralised system is to negotiate agreements, implement agreements, and then resolve disputes. If you'd like even more resources to help you improve your understanding of today's topic, then come over to teachingbubble.com.